The Panama Canal looks, at first, like a piece of infrastructure, a waterway, a passage, a line cut through jungle, rock, disease, and ambition, allowing ships to move between the Atlantic and the Pacific without rounding the bottom of South America. But the canal was never only a shortcut. It was a decision about who would control time, distance, trade, and military reach in the modern world. Before the canal, geography forced patience. A ship moving from New York to San Francisco faced the long, dangerous route around Cape Horn or the difficult transfer across the Central American isthmus. Oceans were connected on maps, but separated by weeks of sailing. The United States could look like a continental nation, but it was not yet a true two-ocean power in the full strategic sense. Its Atlantic and Pacific coasts were far apart in military time. Its navy could not move quickly from one ocean to the other. Its commerce was shaped by the brutal fact that the Americas were long. Then came the canal dream. Cut through the narrow waist of the hemisphere and make the world shorter. Whoever controlled that cut would not only collect tolls, it would control a hinge of global movement. It would decide how quickly warships could move, how efficiently goods could travel, how close distant markets could become, and how much power could be projected from one ocean into another. That is why the Panama Canal helped make America an empire. Not an empire only of colonies, flags, and governors, though the United States had those too. It made America an empire of mobility, an empire of naval reach, an empire of logistics, a country that could now look east and west at the same time. But the canal was also born from conquest, disease, racial hierarchy, engineering triumph, political manipulation, and Panamanian sovereignty sacrificed in the name of American strategy. Its story is not simply about digging a ditch. It is about the making of modern power. Long before engineers arrived with maps and machines, the Isthmus of Panama was already a corridor. Indigenous peoples lived, traded, traveled, and built communities across the land bridge joining North and South America. The isthmus was not empty, and it was not merely a future canal site waiting for outsiders to discover it. It had its own histories, languages, routes, and political worlds. European empires saw the isthmus differently. To Spain, after conquest began, Panama became a hinge in the imperial system. Gold and silver from the Pacific side of the Spanish Empire could be moved across the narrow land route and shipped to Europe. The isthmus became a place of transit, extraction, and danger. Treasure routes, ports, mule trains, forts, raids, and imperial anxiety. Even before a canal existed, Panama's geography made it strategic. This is one of the key facts in the whole story. The canal did not create Panama's importance. It intensified an importance that geography had already given it. The narrowness of the land between two oceans meant that every empire with oceanic ambitions eventually looked at it and imagined possibility. A road, a railway, a canal, a military route, a commercial artery. The tragedy is that strategic geography often turns local societies into instruments of outside desire. Panama's position made it valuable to others before it was fully sovereign for itself. That pattern would repeat under Spain, Colombia, France, the United States, and later under the pressures of global trade and US-China rivalry. The isthmus was never just land. It was a temptation. Spanish officials understood very early that the Central American isthmus might hold the key to imperial movement. If the Atlantic and Pacific could be joined, Spain's empire would become more efficient, more connected, and easier to defend. The idea of a water passage haunted maps and royal imaginations for centuries. But desire and capability are different things. The terrain was difficult, the technology inadequate, and the empire had other ways to move wealth across the isthmus without cutting through it. So the dream remained partly a fantasy, partly a strategic wish. Roads and trails carried treasure. Ports grew. Pirates and privateers attacked. The Caribbean became a violent theater of empire. Panama was already a place where global wealth passed through local geography under the shadow of force. This early Spanish period matters because it shows that the canal was not a sudden modern idea. It was one of the old dreams of empire, to make geography obey power. Every empire wants to shorten distance. Every empire wants to remove friction. Mountains, jungles, rivers, disease, and local resistance all stand in the way of imperial movement. The dream of a canal was the dream of reducing the world to a more manageable shape. By the 19th century, when technology, capital, and imperial competition had changed, that old dream began to look possible. The question was no longer whether a canal would matter. The question was who would build it, where, and under whose flag. The California Gold Rush transformed the American relationship with Panama. After 1848, thousands of people wanted to move quickly between the eastern United States and the Pacific coast. Before a transcontinental railroad existed, one of the fastest routes ran through Panama, sail to the Caribbean side, cross the isthmus, and continue north by sea to California. The demand for speed turned Panama into part of America's own continental transformation. The Panama Railroad, completed in the 1850s, was one of the great engineering and commercial achievements of its day. It crossed the isthmus before the canal did, moving passengers, mail, and cargo between oceans. It also foreshadowed the later canal story in darker ways: disease, brutal labor conditions, foreign capital, and the treatment of tropical geography as a problem to be solved at human cost. The railroad changed American perceptions. Panama was no longer only a Spanish imperial memory or a Latin American corridor. It became part of U.S. movement, U.S. commerce, and U.S. expansion. As the United States pushed westward, acquired Pacific territories, and began imagining a larger naval role, the need for a faster connection between oceans became strategic, not merely commercial. The railroad proved the isthmus could be made into infrastructure. It also proved that control over the isthmus would matter to the United States. The canal was still decades away, but the logic of American power was already moving south. For much of the 19th century, the United States debated whether the interoceanic canal should run through Nicaragua or Panama. Nicaragua offered lakes and river routes that seemed attractive to some planners. Panama offered a shorter route, but difficult terrain and the legacy of failed French work. The choice was never purely technical. It involved geology, diplomacy, disease, cost, lobbying, national rivalry, and strategic imagination. The Nicaragua route had powerful supporters. It seemed, in some ways, more natural. But Panama had a railroad, prior excavation, and eventually French canal assets available for purchase. The debate became entangled with politics in Washington, with lobbyists and engineers arguing over volcanoes, distance, lock designs, and risk. Even postage stamps depicting Nicaraguan volcanoes were used in the lobbying battle to suggest danger along that route. This episode matters because it reminds us that the canal's location was not inevitable. The shortcut that made America an empire could have been built somewhere else. If it had, Panama's history, Central American politics, and U.S. strategy would have unfolded differently. But once the decision moved toward Panama, the political problem sharpened. Panama was then part of Colombia. The United States wanted control, speed, and legal certainty. Colombia was not willing to accept every American demand. That conflict would lead to one of the most controversial acts in the history of U.S. power in Latin America: the creation of an independent Panama under the shadow of American intervention. Before the Americans, there were the French. Ferdinand de Lesseps, celebrated for the Suez Canal, became the symbol of the French attempt to cut through Panama. Suez had made him a legend. But Panama was not Suez. The Desert Canal and the tropical isthmus were different worlds. In Egypt, engineers faced sand and sea level. In Panama, they faced jungle, mountains, rivers, landslides, torrential rain, and diseases they did not yet fully understand. The French project began with enormous prestige and financial enthusiasm. Investors believed in de Lesseps. France believed in engineering glory. The canal promised to repeat the miracle of Suez in the Americas. But the plan was flawed from the start, especially the early commitment to a sea-level canal. The terrain fought back. The Calabria Cut became a nightmare. Excavation was slow, expensive, and dangerous. Landslides undid work. Equipment struggled. The tropical environment punished European assumptions. Worse than the earth was disease. Yellow fever and malaria killed workers in terrifying numbers. At the time, the role of mosquitoes in transmitting these diseases was not yet understood by many project leaders. The result was death on a scale that shattered morale and finances. Hospitals filled. Cemeteries expanded. Ships brought men into a zone many would never leave. The French effort collapsed in scandal, bankruptcy, and grief. It was one of the great engineering failures of the 19th century, but it left behind something important: excavations, equipment, surveys, a route, a company, and assets that the United States would later acquire. The French failed, but their failure prepared the ground for the American empire. The Panama Canal could not be built until disease was understood. This is one of the most important facts in the story. Mountains could be cut, rivers dammed, locks designed, railroads laid, and steam shovels deployed. But if yellow fever and malaria continued killing workers at the rate seen under the French, no amount of ambition would be enough. The breakthrough came through medical science and public health. Work by Carlos Finley, Walter Reed, William Gorgas, and others helped establish the role of mosquitoes in transmitting yellow fever and malaria. Under American control, Gorgas led massive sanitation campaigns, draining standing water, fumigating buildings, screening windows, cutting vegetation, oiling water surfaces, improving waste management, and attacking mosquito breeding grounds. This was not glamorous engineering, but it was decisive. The canal was built not only by steam shovels and locks, but by mosquito control. Public health became imperial infrastructure. Without it, the American project might have followed the French into catastrophe. Yet this achievement also had a darker side. Sanitation improved survival, but the labor system remained unequal. Workers, especially black workers from the Caribbean, often endured harsh conditions, segregation, lower pay, and dangerous work. The conquest of disease did not mean the end of exploitation. It meant the project could proceed. The invisible wall had been breached. Now America could turn to the visible one: rock, mud, water, and politics. At the beginning of the 20th century, Panama was still part of Colombia. The United States wanted a treaty that would give it the rights needed to build and control a canal zone. The proposed Harrenhal Treaty would have granted the United States canal rights in exchange for payment, but the Colombian Senate rejected it. To Colombia, the deal did not offer enough sovereignty, dignity, or compensation. To Washington, the rejection was an obstacle. This moment is crucial because it shows the imperial impatience behind the canal. The United States did not treat Colombia's refusal as the end of negotiation. It treated it as a problem to be bypassed. President Theodore Roosevelt believed the canal was too important to be delayed by what he saw as Colombian obstruction. The strategic prize outweighed the sovereignty concerns of a weaker Latin American state. Panamanian separatists, frustrated with Bogotá and eager for the benefits a canal might bring, found an opportunity. The United States signaled support. When Panama declared independence in November 1903, American naval power helped prevent Colombia from suppressing the revolt. Panama was born under the shadow of U.S. warships. The shortcut that would make America an empire began with the separation of Panama from Colombia. That fact has never stopped echoing. For Americans, it was often remembered as decisive leadership. For many in Latin America, it looked like engineered secession in the service of empire. Panama's independence in 1903 brought immediate recognition from the United States. But recognition came with a price. The Hemisphere Treaty, signed shortly afterward, gave the United States sweeping rights over the canal zone. The treaty was not signed by a Panamanian representative in the fullest democratic sense, but by Philippe Benavarilla, a Frenchman deeply tied to the canal project and eager to secure the deal. The treaty granted the United States control over a strip of territory through the heart of the new country. In practical terms, Panama gained independence and lost control of the most strategically important corridor within its borders almost at the same moment. This was the central contradiction of Panama's birth as a republic. It became sovereign with a foreign-controlled zone cutting through it. To U.S. leaders, the arrangement was necessary. They were investing money, labor, and strategic risk into a project of global importance. They wanted certainty and control. To Panamanians, the canal zone would become a wound, a reminder that their state had been born through American support but constrained by American power. The canal was not only built in Panama. It divided Panama. It created a physical and political space where U.S. authority operated in ways that Panamanians experienced as a violation of national dignity. That wound would shape relations for most of the 20th century. The canal zone became a strange American enclave inside Panama. It had its own administration, schools, police, courts, clubs, housing, rules, and racial hierarchies. For Americans living there, it could feel like a tropical extension of the United States, carefully managed and separated from the surrounding republic. For Panamanians, it often felt like a colonial occupation in the middle of their own country. The zone was not merely a work site. It was a political statement. It said that the canal was too important to be left fully under Panamanian control. It placed U.S. authority across the isthmus and created a visible line between those who governed the shortcut and those whose national territory contained it. The social world of the Canal Zone reflected the racial order of the early 20th century United States and Empire. White American workers enjoyed privileges denied to many others. Black workers, especially from the British Caribbean, faced discrimination, lower wages, and segregated systems. The gold roll and silver roll pay structures formalized inequality, with race and nationality shaping access to pay, housing, and services. The canal was therefore not only an engineering miracle, it was a society built around hierarchy. The waterway shortened the world, but the zone around it reproduced some of the hardest divisions of the age. Theodore Roosevelt understood the canal as a test of American will. He believed great nations acted boldly. He believed naval power mattered. He believed the United States had a destiny in the hemisphere and beyond. The Panama Canal fit perfectly into his worldview. It was practical, strategic, symbolic, and imperial all at once. Roosevelt later defended his actions with characteristic bluntness. The phrase often associated with him, that he took Panama, captured the spirit of the moment, whether admired or condemned. To supporters, he cut through delay and made history. To critics, he trampled sovereignty and dressed power as progress. The canal became the physical expression of Roosevelt's foreign policy. The United States would no longer be a passive continental republic. It would act. It would build. It would intervene. It would connect oceans and project naval strength. The canal and the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine belonged to the same world, one in which Washington claimed a special role in the Western Hemisphere. The cost of that vision was borne by others as well as Americans. Colombia lost Panama. Panama lost full control of the canal corridor. Caribbean workers died and labored under unequal systems. The canal was a triumph, but not an innocent one. It was Roosevelt's monument and Latin America's warning. The American Canal Project was one of the greatest engineering efforts of the modern age. It required not only digging, but reimagining the landscape. Rather than follow the French sea-level plan, American engineers built a lock canal that would raise ships up to Gatun Lake and lower them again to the other ocean. This meant damming rivers, creating an enormous artificial lake, cutting through the continental divide, and constructing locks on a scale that stunned the world. Gatun Dam and Gatun Lake were central to the design. The Chagres River, once feared for floods, became part of the canal system. Water would lift ships like an invisible elevator. The locks became the mechanical heart of the canal, massive gates, chambers, valves, and controlled flows of freshwater moving vessels across the isthmus. The Calabar Cut, later known as the Gallard Cut, was the most dramatic excavation challenge. Workers and machines carved through rock and unstable slopes, only to watch landslides undo huge amounts of labor. The cut became a symbol of the battle between engineering and geology. Steam shovels, rail cars, dynamite, drills, and human labor worked in constant motion. The canal was not one invention but a system. Medicine, excavation, rail logistics, concrete, hydrology, locks, dams, administration, and labor discipline. It was modernity organized at continental scale, and when it worked, it made the world smaller. The Panama Canal is often remembered through presidents and engineers, but it was built by workers. Tens of thousands of them came from Barbados, Jamaica, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Spain, Italy, the United States, Panama, and elsewhere. Many were Black Caribbean laborers who performed some of the hardest and most dangerous work while receiving lower pay and fewer privileges than white American employees. The labor system divided workers into gold and silver rolls. The gold roll was largely for white American skilled workers and officials, paid in gold and given better housing, services, and status. The silver roll was largely for non-white workers, paid less and treated as inferior. This system reproduced racial hierarchy inside the canal project and shaped life in the canal zone long after construction ended. Workers faced heat, mud, accidents, explosions, landslides, disease, exhaustion, and discipline. They moved earth, laid track, poured concrete, carried materials, operated machinery, cooked, cleaned, and maintained the machinery of the project. Without them, no presidential will and no engineering vision would have mattered. To call the canal an American triumph is incomplete. It was also a Caribbean labor story, a Panamanian story, a migrant story, and a story of racialized empire. The shortcut that made America powerful was built by people whose names were rarely placed at the center of the monument. The Panama Canal does not work by simply cutting a channel at sea level. It works through water management. Freshwater lifts ships through locks, fills chambers, sustains Gatun Lake, and makes the crossing possible. Every transit uses water. That makes the canal not only an engineering system, but a hydrological system. It depends on rain, reservoirs, watersheds, forests, and careful management. This is one reason the canal's modern drought problems are so important. They reveal a truth that was always present. The canal is not independent of nature. It is a machine built into a tropical watershed. If rainfall patterns change, if reservoirs fall, if population demand grows, if climate variability intensifies, canal operations can be constrained. For much of the 20th century, the canal symbolized control over geography. But the water problem reminds us that control is never total. A canal can shorten oceans, but it cannot command rain. The same water that makes global trade possible also supplies people and ecosystems in Panama. The canal must compete not only with ships, but with cities, farms, and climate. The shortcut that made America an empire now faces a 21st century question. Can a freshwater canal operate reliably in a world of climate stress? That question gives the old waterway a new vulnerability. The Panama Canal officially opened in 1914, the same year Europe descended into the First World War. The timing was almost surreal. One of the great projects of global connection came alive just as the world's major powers entered a conflict that would destroy empires, redraw borders, and transform modern politics. The opening did not receive the full celebratory global attention it might have in a calmer year. War overshadowed the canal. But strategically, the canal's importance was immediately clear. The United States now possessed a way to move naval forces between oceans far more efficiently. American coastal defense, Pacific strategy, and Atlantic commitments were now connected through a U.S.-controlled passage. The canal also changed commerce. It shortened routes, lowered costs, and altered shipping patterns. Ports on both coasts of the United States gained new meaning. Latin America, Asia, Europe, and the Caribbean were linked through a new artificial geography. The world did not become borderless, but distance changed. The canal's opening marked the arrival of the United States as a builder of global infrastructure and a controller of global choke points. It was not yet the superpower of 1945, but it had taken a decisive step toward that future. A country that could build and control Panama could no longer be understood as only continental. For the U.S. Navy, the Panama Canal was transformative. Before it existed, moving a fleet from the Atlantic to the Pacific required the long route around South America. That was not only inconvenient, it was strategically dangerous. A navy divided by geography is slower to respond. A navy connected by a canal can concentrate power. The canal gave the United States flexibility. Warships could move between oceans. Naval planners could think in two-ocean terms. The Pacific became less distant from Washington's Atlantic-based power, and the Atlantic became less isolated from Pacific threats. This mattered as Japan rose, as the United States acquired Pacific territories, and later as global naval strategy became central to American power. The canal also influenced ship design, logistics, and basing. The dimensions of the locks shaped the famous Panamax standard. Infrastructure began to define the size of global movement. A canal built for ships also shaped ships built for the canal. This is what it means to say the canal made America an empire. It did not only generate tolls or prestige. It changed the military geometry of the United States. It allowed a continental nation to act like an oceanic power. It made mobility into strategy. In the United States, the canal was often celebrated as proof of national energy, engineering genius, and destiny. In much of Latin America, the story looked different. It looked like intervention, unequal treaties, gunboat diplomacy, and the birth of Panama under American pressure. The canal became a symbol of the wider U.S. role in the hemisphere, powerful, modernizing, and deeply intrusive. This difference in memory matters. Americans often emphasize construction. Latin Americans often emphasize sovereignty. Americans saw the defeat of disease and geography. Panamanians saw a foreign zone through their national territory. Americans saw Roosevelt's boldness. Colombians saw territorial loss. Workers saw hierarchy. Caribbean communities saw migration and sacrifice. No single memory owns the canal. That is why the story remains contested. It can be a wonder of engineering and an act of imperial power at the same time. It can improve global trade and wound national dignity. It can create Panama's economic centrality while limiting Panama's sovereignty for most of the 20th century. The canal's power lies partly in this contradiction. It is too useful to dismiss and too compromised to romanticize. Like many imperial projects, it built something real while leaving behind arguments that never ended. By the 1960s, Panamanian resentment over the canal zone had reached a breaking point. The zone's separate status, American control, and symbolic exclusion became intolerable to many Panamanians, especially students and nationalists who saw the U.S. presence as a daily insult to sovereignty. The question of flags became explosive because flags are never just cloth in a colonial context. They represent who belongs and who rules. In January 1964, clashes over the display of the Panamanian flag in the canal zone escalated into deadly violence. Panamanians died. The crisis shook relations between Panama and the United States and forced Washington to confront the fact that the old arrangement could not continue indefinitely. A canal built for American power was now producing instability because of the sovereignty it denied. The flag riots mattered because they transformed Panamanian nationalism into a diplomatic force the United States could no longer dismiss. The issue was not only practical management of the canal, it was dignity. A country could not accept a foreign enclave forever and still feel fully sovereign. This was the beginning of the end for the old canal zone order. The canal would remain strategically vital, but the political basis of U.S. control was eroding. The age of unquestioned American rule over the waterway was closing. The Torrijos-Carter treaties of 1977 were among the most important diplomatic agreements in the history of the Western Hemisphere. They provided for the transfer of control of the Panama Canal from the United States to Panama by the end of 1999. For Panama, the treaties represented the long struggle to recover sovereignty. For the United States, they were politically controversial because many Americans believed giving up the canal meant surrendering a strategic achievement. Omar Torrijos, Panama's military leader, framed the issue as national dignity. Jimmy Carter framed the treaties as a moral and strategic necessity, a way to correct an unjust arrangement and build a more stable relationship with Latin America. The debate in the United States was fierce. Critics argued that America had built the canal and should keep it. Supporters argued that continued control was unsustainable and unjust. The treaties did not end American interest in the canal. They did not make the waterway less strategic, but they changed the legal and political framework. The canal would no longer be in American possession through the canal zone. It would become Panamanian. This transfer was not charity. It was the result of pressure, diplomacy, nationalism, and changing global norms. The era of formal canal empire was ending. The question was what kind of influence would replace it. The canal remained central to U.S.-Panama relations during the rise and fall of Manuel Noriega. Noriega, once connected to U.S. intelligence interests, became a problem for Washington as allegations of drug trafficking, repression, and electoral manipulation mounted. In 1989, the United States invaded Panama in Operation Just Cause, removing Noriega from power. The invasion showed that even as the canal transfer process was underway, the United States still saw Panama as a place where it could act militarily when it believed its interests required it. The canal was not the only reason for the invasion, but its presence shaped the strategic environment. Panama was not just another small country. It contained one of the world's key waterways and a history of U.S. military presence. For Panamanians, the invasion remains a painful and contested memory. It ended Noriega's rule, but it also caused destruction, civilian deaths, and renewed questions about U.S. power. The canal story cannot be separated from this broader history of intervention. The late 20th century therefore produced a paradox. The United States was preparing to hand over the canal, but it was still willing to use force in Panama. Sovereignty was increasing, but the shadow of American power had not disappeared. On December 31, 1999, Panama took full control of the canal. The transfer marked the end of an era that had begun with the Habeas Treaty nearly a century earlier. For Panama, it was a historic recovery of sovereignty. The canal that had divided the country and symbolized foreign dominance now belonged to Panamanians. The handover was peaceful, but its meaning was enormous. Many skeptics had claimed Panama would not be able to operate the canal efficiently. Those claims proved wrong. The Panama Canal Authority developed a strong reputation for professional management. The canal remained efficient, profitable, and central to global trade under Panamanian control. This matters because it reversed an imperial assumption. For decades, defenders of U.S. control argued that the canal was too important to leave to Panama. After 1999, Panama showed that sovereignty and competence were not opposites. The waterway did not collapse when the empire left. The handover also changed Panama's national identity. The canal became not only an economic engine, but a symbol of recovered dignity. Yet sovereignty brought new responsibilities: water management, expansion, neutrality, security, and the constant pressure of great powers who still understood the canal as a strategic prize. The canal entered a new era with the opening of the expanded locks in 2016. The expansion allowed larger Neo-Panamax ships to transit, reshaping shipping patterns and strengthening Panama's position in global logistics. It was a massive undertaking and a statement that Panama was not merely preserving an old canal, but adapting it to modern trade. The expansion reflected changes in the global economy. Container ships had grown larger. LNG shipments mattered more. Supply chains were more complex. Ports on the U.S. East Coast prepared for bigger vessels. The canal had to evolve or risk losing relevance to alternative routes and ship designs. But expansion also intensified the water problem. Larger locks and more traffic meant greater pressure on freshwater resources. The canal's future depended not only on concrete and gates, but on rainfall, reservoirs, and watershed protection. Growth created new vulnerabilities. The 2016 expansion showed Panama's ambition and capability. It also set the stage for the climate-era canal, a larger, more valuable, more profitable system increasingly exposed to drought and hydrological stress. The canal had grown. Its dependence on water had grown with it. The drought of 2023 and 2024 exposed the canal's modern vulnerability. Low water levels forced the Panama Canal Authority to reduce daily transits and limit ship drafts. Vessels waited. Shipping schedules shifted. Some companies paid high fees for priority. Others rerouted. A canal that seemed like a reliable shortcut suddenly became a bottleneck. This crisis mattered because it showed how climate and trade are now inseparable. A drought in Panama can affect supply chains across the world. Water levels in Gatun Lake can influence shipping costs, delivery times, energy markets, and port planning thousands of miles away. The canal is global infrastructure built on local rainfall. Panama responded with water-saving measures and long-term planning, but the warning remains. The canal needs fresh water for every lockage. That same water also matters to Panama's population. As climate patterns become less predictable, the competition between human consumption, ecological needs, and global trade may become more intense. The canal was built as a triumph over geography. The drought reminded the world that geography was never fully defeated. It was negotiated, and climate change is rewriting the terms. The Panama Canal belongs to a family of global choke points: Suez, Hormuz, Malacca, the Bosporus, the Bab el-Mandeb, and others. These places matter because global systems are not evenly distributed. Trade moves through narrow passages. Energy flows through vulnerable routes. War, drought, accidents, blockades, or political pressure at one choke point can ripple across the world. In the 21st century, choke points have become more visible because supply chains are more interconnected and more fragile. The ever-given blockage in the Suez Canal reminded the world that one stuck ship can disrupt global commerce. Tension in the Red Sea showed how conflict can reroute trade. Drought in Panama showed how climate can do what war does, slow movement through a vital artery. The Panama Canal is different from Hormuz or Suez because it is an engineered freshwater lock system, not a natural strait or sea-level canal. But its strategic function is similar. It concentrates movement. It creates dependence. It gives the controlling state leverage and responsibility. A global economy that celebrates efficiency often forgets that efficiency creates vulnerability. The Panama Canal is one of the most efficient shortcuts ever built. That is exactly why disruptions matter. The newest struggle over the Panama Canal is not about digging or treaty rights. It is about influence around infrastructure. In recent years, U.S. officials have expressed concern about Chinese-linked companies operating ports near the canal, especially the Balboa and Cristobal terminals associated with Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison through Panama Ports Company. China has denied controlling the canal, while Panama has insisted on its sovereignty. But the dispute has become part of a broader U.S.-China rivalry over ports, shipping, logistics, and strategic infrastructure. This matters because modern power often works through commercial presence. A port concession is not an army. A terminal operator is not a colonial governor. But in a world of great power competition, ports can become strategic assets. Control over data, logistics, scheduling, cranes, cargo flows, and emergency access can generate anxiety even when ownership is formally private. Panama is caught in the middle. It wants investment, trade, and sovereignty. It does not want to be treated as a battlefield between Washington and Beijing. But the canal's importance makes neutrality difficult. When the United States sees Chinese influence near the waterway, it sees a strategic threat. When China sees U.S. pressure, it sees containment and interference. The canal has entered a new imperial age, not of gunboats and treaty zones, but of concessions, arbitration, supply chains, and geopolitical suspicion. Panama's central challenge today is to defend sovereignty without alienating powerful partners. The canal handles a significant share of world trade and is especially important to U.S. commerce. That gives Washington a permanent interest. China is a major global trading power and infrastructure actor, giving Beijing its own reasons to care. Shipping companies, port operators, insurers, and logistics firms all have stakes. Panama must manage them while insisting that the canal is Panamanian. This is not easy. Sovereignty for a small country located at a global choke point is always under pressure. Larger powers may use the language of security, investment, transparency, or partnership, but their real concern is often control over risk. Panama must constantly translate outside demands into national interests without letting the canal become someone else's instrument. The 1999 handover gave Panama legal control. The 21st century tests whether legal control is enough in an era of financial pressure, port concessions, cyber risk, climate stress, and great power rivalry. A flag over the canal is essential, but sovereignty also means control over contracts, data, water, security policy, and long-term strategy. Panama recovered the canal from direct empire. Now it must defend it from indirect pressure. Few foreign infrastructures occupy the American imagination like the Panama Canal. To many Americans, it represents national achievement. Roosevelt, engineering, tropical conquest, and the rise of the United States as a world power. That memory can make it difficult for Americans to accept that the canal is no longer theirs. This is why calls to take back the canal resonate with some audiences. They draw on a nostalgic belief that American-built infrastructure should remain under American command. But this view ignores Panama's sovereignty, the history of unequal treaties, and the successful Panamanian administration of the canal since 1999. It treats a modern country as if it were still a footnote to U.S. greatness. The canal's American memory is selective. It remembers steam shovels and Roosevelt. It often forgets Colombian sovereignty, Panamanian nationalism, Caribbean labor, segregation, disease, and the canal zone's colonial character. It remembers the shortcut, but not always the people whose territory and labor made it possible. A mature understanding of the canal requires America to hold two truths together. The United States built a world-changing waterway, and it did so through imperial power. One truth without the other becomes propaganda. For Panama, the canal is not only infrastructure, it is national identity. The country's modern birth, economy, politics, and international role are inseparable from the waterway. Panama became independent in the context of the canal project. It lived for decades with the canal zone dividing its territory. It fought diplomatically and politically to recover control. Since 1999, it has administered the canal as a symbol of competence and sovereignty. This makes outside pressure especially sensitive. When foreign leaders speak about control of the canal, Panamanians hear more than policy. They hear history returning. They hear the old assumption that Panama's geography is too important for Panamanians to control by themselves. They hear the echo of a century in which the most important land in the country was governed by someone else. The canal is therefore a source of pride and vulnerability at once. It gives Panama global importance. It also makes Panama a target of attention from powers far larger than itself. The same waterway that enriches the country exposes it to pressure. This is the destiny of choke point states. They are powerful because everyone needs them, and vulnerable because everyone needs them. The Panama Canal is no longer only a physical system of locks, gates, tugs, pilots, lakes, and channels. It is also a digital system. Modern shipping depends on scheduling software, sensors, communications networks, payment systems, navigation data, logistics platforms, and cyber infrastructure. That means the canal's security is no longer only about soldiers or sabotage. It is also about code. A cyber attack on canal operations could disrupt scheduling, billing, vessel movement, communications, or safety systems. Even the perception of vulnerability could affect shipping confidence. In a world where ports, pipelines, and shipping companies have already faced cyber threats, the canal must be defended as digital infrastructure. This changes the meaning of strategic control. A foreign company does not need to own the canal to generate anxiety if it has access to data or systems near the canal. A hostile actor does not need to bomb a lock if it can disrupt operations digitally. The future of canal security includes cybersecurity, data governance, vendor scrutiny, and resilience planning. The shortcut that made America an empire now runs through servers as well as water. Some might ask whether the Panama Canal still matters in an age of giant ships, alternative routes, and globalized logistics. The answer is yes. It matters because geography still matters. It matters because time still costs money. It matters because supply chains depend on predictable routes. It matters because the United States, Asia, Latin America, and Europe remain connected through maritime trade. It matters because disruptions in one choke point can shift pressure to others. The canal may not carry the majority of world trade, but the share it carries is strategically significant. Its importance is especially high for certain routes and cargoes, including trade connected to the United States. That targeted importance can be more meaningful than a simple global percentage. A choke point does not need to carry everything to matter. It needs to carry enough of the right things. The canal also matters symbolically. It represents Panama's sovereignty, America's rise, engineering ambition, climate vulnerability, and the new politics of infrastructure. Few places connect so many historical layers in such a narrow space. The Panama Canal is not the world's only shortcut, but it may be the shortcut that best reveals how modern power works. The canal is also a story about labor migration and Caribbean history. Thousands of workers from Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and other Caribbean islands crossed into the canal zone because wages, however unequal, offered opportunity in a region shaped by plantation economies, colonial hierarchies, and limited prospects. They came to build something that would be remembered as an American achievement, even though their labor was one of its foundations. Many of these workers and their descendants formed communities that became part of Panama's social fabric. They brought language, religion, music, food, labor politics, and cultural identity. They also experienced discrimination from both the U.S.-controlled canal zone and, at times, from Hispanic Panamanian society. Their history complicates any simple national story. The canal was not built by one people. It was built by a transnational workforce organized through imperial inequality. The Afro-Caribbean Canal workers reveal how infrastructure creates diasporas. A project meant to move ships also moved people. It rearranged families, identities, and futures. The canal's history is therefore not only about trade routes, but human routes. men and women pulled by empire into the machinery of global connection. When the canal opened, the world saw ships pass between oceans. It did not always see the communities created by the work, the graves left behind, or the racial order built into the system. But those histories remain part of Panama. The canal pilots occupy a unique place in the story. Every large vessel passing through the canal enters a zone where local expertise becomes essential. Pilots guide ships through narrow channels, locks, lake passages, currents, traffic systems, and procedures that outsiders cannot simply improvise. A captain may know the ocean, but the canal requires another kind of knowledge. This is a powerful symbol of Panamanian competence after 1999. The world may debate geopolitics, but every transit depends on practiced, local, institutional expertise. Tugs, line handlers, traffic controllers, engineers, lock operators, maintenance crews, dredging teams, and pilots together form a human system as complex as the concrete one. The canal works because people make it work every day. That everyday professionalism is less dramatic than Roosevelt, de Lesseps, or treaty politics, but it is the true foundation of modern canal sovereignty. Panama's control is not only legal, it is operational. This matters because outside critics sometimes speak as if Panama merely inherited an American machine. But operating the canal is itself a continuous achievement. The machinery must be maintained, the water managed, the traffic scheduled, the locks repaired, the pilots trained, the finances balanced, and the environmental risks monitored. Sovereignty is not a ceremony in 1999. It is the work of every transit after it. The canal's toll system also tells a story about power. Ships pay for the right to save distance and time. The tolls are not merely fees. They are the monetization of geography. A shipping company compares routes, fuel costs, time, risk, cargo value, and canal charges. Panama prices the shortcut. In that act, it turns location into revenue. This is why the canal is so important to Panama's economy. It generates income not only through tolls but through logistics, ports, banking, insurance, warehousing, bunkering, ship services, and related commerce. The canal supports a broader platform economy in which Panama becomes more than a passage. It becomes a maritime and financial hub. But reliance on the canal also creates vulnerability. If drought reduces transits, revenue suffers. If global trade slows, the canal feels it. If geopolitical tension redirects shipping, Panama must adapt. If port disputes escalate, the country becomes exposed to pressure. A national economy built around a choke point is powerful but sensitive. The canal gives Panama leverage, but it also ties Panama's fortunes to the stability of a world that is becoming less stable. The neutrality of the Panama Canal is one of the essential principles of its modern status. The Torrijos-Carter framework included the idea that the canal should remain permanently neutral and open to vessels of all nations under conditions of equality. This principle matters because the canal is too important to become a weapon used casually by one state against another. But neutrality is difficult in a world of rivalry. If the United States fears Chinese influence, neutrality becomes suspicious. If China sees U.S. pressure, neutrality looks compromised. If Panama makes a legal decision about ports, outsiders read it through geopolitics. If Panama receives investment, someone asks who gains leverage. Neutrality is easier to write into treaty language than to preserve in a world where infrastructure itself is strategic. Panama's challenge is to keep the canal open and neutral while proving that neutrality does not mean weakness. It must regulate ports, protect data, manage security, and choose partners without letting any one power define its decisions. The canal can be neutral only if Panama is strong enough to resist being pulled too far in any direction. Neutrality is not passivity. It is active statecraft. The recent port dispute involving C.K. Hutchison's Panama Ports Company showed how quickly commercial arrangements can become geopolitical crises. The company had operated terminals at Balboa and Cristobal, the Pacific and Atlantic gateways near the canal. When Panama's Supreme Court invalidated the legal basis for the concession and the government moved to take control of operations, the dispute immediately became more than a legal matter. For Panama, the issue could be framed as constitutional, contractual, and sovereign. For the United States, It looked like an opportunity to reduce Chinese-linked influence near a strategic waterway. For China and Hong Kong interests, it looked like politicized pressure and unfair treatment. For the company, it became an arbitration fight involving billions of dollars. For shipping markets, it raised concerns about stability at key terminals. This is modern canal politics in miniature. No one needs to seize the canal itself to create a crisis. Influence around the canal is enough. Ports are the hands and feet of maritime trade. Whoever operates them may not control the waterway, but they shape the ecosystem around it. That is why Panama's sovereignty now extends beyond the locks. It must control the legal and commercial architecture surrounding the canal, not only the canal channel itself. The tension over Panama flag vessels detained or inspected in China added another layer to the dispute. Ship registries may sound technical, but Panama's flag is one of the largest in the world. Many vessels fly the Panamanian flag even when their owners are elsewhere. If those vessels face pressure because of a political dispute, Panama feels vulnerability through a system that is global, legal, and commercial all at once. This reveals the strange nature of 21st century pressure. A country may not be invaded. Its ships may be detained. Its companies may face arbitration. Its ports may become legal battlegrounds. Its diplomatic statements may be parsed by rival powers. Its sovereignty may be tested through paperwork, inspections, finance, and insurance. Panama's problem is not simply that the canal is important. It is that everything connected to the canal becomes a pressure point. Port concessions, vessel flags, tolls, drought policy, data, security cooperation, and even public rhetoric. The canal creates a strategic ecosystem, and every part of that ecosystem can be contested. Old empires use troops and treaties. New rivalries use contracts, courts, compliance, shipping data, and market access. The Panama Canal also sits inside a broader American anxiety about Chinese maritime infrastructure. Around the world, Chinese state-linked or Chinese-owned firms have invested in ports, terminals, logistics, and shipping networks. Some of this is ordinary commerce. Some of it supports China's global trade needs. Some of it raises legitimate security concerns for the United States and its allies. The problem is separating commercial reality from strategic fear. Not every Chinese-linked port operation is a military threat, but not every port operation is politically neutral either. Ports collect information, shape supply chains, and can matter in a crisis. In a war or confrontation, what looks commercial in peacetime may become strategic. Panama is especially sensitive because of the canal's history. The United States built and controlled the waterway for most of the 20th century. Now Washington watches rival influence near the same passage with alarm. But from Panama's perspective, American alarm can sound like the old claim that the canal is too important for Panama to manage without U.S. supervision. This is the diplomatic trap. The United States may have real concerns, but the way it expresses them can revive the very imperial memories that make Panama defensive. Water is the canal's most immediate future challenge. The locks use fresh water, and every transit depends on reservoir levels. Gatun Lake and other water sources do not exist only for ships. They also help support Panama's population and ecosystems. That makes canal water a national resource under global pressure. As Panama grows, urban demand rises. As climate patterns shift, rainfall becomes less predictable. As ships become larger and transit demand grows, canal operations require careful planning. The question of new reservoirs, conservation measures, watershed protection, and infrastructure investment is not merely technical. It is political and environmental. If Panama builds new water projects, communities may be affected. Land may be flooded or regulated. Environmental concerns will arise. If Panama does not build enough capacity, canal operations may suffer. Either way, the water problem forces the country to balance local rights against global expectations. The canal was designed to master water. In the 21st century, Panama must govern water. That is harder. Mastery implies command. Governance requires compromise. The canal watershed is therefore one of the most important landscapes in global trade. Forests, rivers, rainfall, reservoirs, and communities all help determine whether ships can move between oceans. The world sees container vessels. The canal sees hydrology. A tree cut in a watershed, a dry season extended by climate variability, a reservoir drawn down too far, a city needing more drinking water. All these can shape global movement. This is why environmental protection around the canal is not a luxury. It is infrastructure maintenance. Forests help regulate water. Healthy watersheds support reliability. Climate adaptation becomes part of trade policy. The canal's future depends on ecosystems that many shipping companies will never see. Panama's canal managers know this. The challenge is financial, political, and long-term. Global trade tends to demand immediate reliability. Watershed protection demands patience. It requires investing before crisis. It requires persuading citizens that protecting water for the canal can also protect water for Panama. It requires resisting the illusion that engineering alone can solve what climate and land use create. The canal was cut through nature. Now it survives by negotiating with nature. The Panama Canal also changed the geography of American cities. East Coast and Gulf ports became more connected to Asia. West Coast routes interacted with canal pricing and ship sizes. The U.S. heartland could send and receive goods through ports whose importance rose or fell with canal capacity. The canal shaped not only naval strategy, but commercial geography. The 2016 expansion intensified this effect. Larger vessels could reach U.S. East Coast ports more efficiently, encouraging dredging, port upgrades, rail improvements, and warehouse development. A canal in Panama could influence infrastructure spending in Savannah, Charleston, New York, New Jersey, Houston, and other ports. This is the hidden reach of choke points. They reorganize places far away. For consumers, the canal is invisible. Goods arrive, shelves fill, cars, grain, gas, chemicals, electronics, and containers move through systems few people see. But if the canal slows, the invisible becomes visible. Delays, costs, and rerouting appear in prices and schedules. Modern life depends on hidden geography. The Panama Canal is one of the places where hidden geography becomes decisive. The canal's relationship with energy is also important. Liquefied natural gas, petroleum products, chemicals, and other energy-related cargoes use the route, depending on market conditions and vessel types. The expansion made LNG transits more significant, especially for U.S. exports toward Asia. This tied the canal more closely to energy geopolitics. Energy routes are always strategic. If the canal is constrained, energy cargoes may reroute. If drought reduces transits, competition for slots can affect costs. If geopolitical conflict disrupts other routes like Suez or the Red Sea, pressure on Panama can rise. Global energy markets do not move through one path. They adjust through a network of paths. But key passages still matter. This gives Panama another layer of responsibility. The canal is not just carrying manufactured goods. It is part of the energy system. That means disruptions can matter to power plants, industries, and consumers far away. The canal was built in the age of coal and battleships. It now operates in the age of LNG, container ships, climate stress, and supply chain analytics. Its basic function remains the same, but the world moving through it has changed. The canal's relationship with China cannot be separated from the broader transformation of global trade. China became the manufacturing center of the world, and maritime routes became the arteries through which that transformation reached consumers everywhere. Ports, containers, shipyards, logistics software, maritime finance, and shipping companies all became part of China's rise. The Panama Canal, though physically far from China, became part of the network through which Chinese-made goods moved toward the Atlantic world. This is why Chinese-linked port activity near the canal produces anxiety in Washington. It is not only about one company or one concession. It is about a larger fear that China's commercial reach can become strategic leverage. If Chinese firms operate ports near important waterways, build infrastructure, finance terminals, control data systems, or gain influence over logistics corridors, American officials worry about what might happen in a crisis. But Panama is not simply an object in this rivalry. It has its own interests. It wants trade with China. It wants good relations with the United States. It wants investment without domination. It wants sovereignty without isolation. This is a difficult balancing act because the canal's importance makes every partnership look suspicious to someone. In the age of great power competition, small countries do not escape history by staying neutral. They must practice neutrality with skill. Panama's future may depend on how well it can say yes to commerce and no to control. The canal also sits inside the history of American informal empire. Unlike formal colonial empires, the United States often preferred influence through bases, treaties, corporations, banks, customs receiverships, military interventions, and friendly governments. The canal zone was more direct than many forms of influence, but it belonged to this broader pattern. The United States did not always need to annex countries. It needed to shape the conditions under which they acted. Panama was one of the clearest examples. The U.S. helped create the conditions for Panama's independence, secured treaty rights, built the canal, controlled the zone, and treated the waterway as central to hemispheric defense. This was empire without always using the word empire. It was sovereignty arranged around U.S. priorities. That history is why modern American warnings about China can sound complicated in Panama. Washington may say it is defending Panamanian sovereignty against Chinese influence. Panamanians may hear a country with its own long record of limiting Panamanian sovereignty. The messenger carries history. This does not make Chinese influence harmless. It means U.S. policy must be historically literate. A country cannot effectively warn about foreign domination while forgetting its own role in the story. The canal's engineering also had a psychological effect on the United States. It created a belief that technical mastery and political will could solve enormous problems. Jungle, disease, mountains, rivers, and distance had been overcome. The canal became part of a national mythology of practical genius. Americans do not wait for geography, they remake it. This confidence powered much of the 20th century. Dams, highways, airports, military bases, space programs, and global logistics all belong to a similar imagination. Build the system, move the obstacle, organize the world. The Panama Canal was an early monument to that mindset. But the canal also reveals the danger of such confidence. Technical mastery can hide political arrogance. Engineering success can make moral questions seem secondary. A project can work and still be unjust. A canal can operate beautifully while the treaty that enabled it remains a wound. A machine can be efficient while the society around it is unequal. The modern world still struggles with this. Infrastructure is often celebrated for what it does, not how it came to exist. The Panama Canal forces us to ask both questions. The story of the canal is also a story about measurement. Engineers measured rainfall, excavation volumes, lock dimensions, ship drafts, concrete pours, rail movements, worker productivity, disease rates, landslide volumes, and costs. Empire loves measurement because measurement makes control feel rational. If something can be counted, it can be managed. If it can be managed, it can be justified. But not everything important was measured equally. How does one measure humiliation? How does one measure a country divided by a foreign zone? How does one measure the life of a worker paid less because of race? How does one measure a treaty signed under pressure? How does one measure the resentment that builds when a foreign flag flies in the middle of national territory? The canal's ledgers captured tons of earth and cubic yards of concrete. They did not fully capture the political emotion that would later force the canal's transfer to Panama. This is one of history's recurring lessons. Systems can appear stable when their technical metrics are strong, while their moral foundations are weakening. The canal zone functioned. Ships moved. Revenues flowed. But legitimacy was eroding underneath. The canal's military value changed after the Second World War, but did not disappear. Aircraft carriers became too large for the old locks. Missile technology changed strategic assumptions. The United States built a global network of bases and no longer depended on the canal in the same way it had in the battleship era. Yet the canal remained important for logistics, commercial supply, regional security, and symbolism. This evolution matters because strategic importance is not fixed. A choke point can matter differently across time. In one era, it is essential for battleships. In another, for container ships. In another, for energy cargo. In another, for data, ports, and supply chain resilience. The canal's value persists because it adapts to the needs of each age. That is why arguments that the canal is outdated miss the point. It is not the same strategic object it was in 1914, but it remains a strategic object. It has shifted from naval empire to trade infrastructure to climate-vulnerable choke point to U.S.-China pressure zone. The canal survives by changing what kind of power moves through it. The waterway is old. The reasons it matters keep renewing themselves. The Panama Canal also shaped ideas of American responsibility in the hemisphere. If the United States built and controlled the canal, it had to protect it. If it had to protect it, it needed influence in the Caribbean and Central America. If it needed influence, interventions could be justified as security. This logic created a chain in which one infrastructure project helped support a broader pattern of U.S. involvement in Latin America. The canal did not cause every intervention, but it reinforced the strategic mentality behind many of them. Stability near the canal became an American concern. Governments, revolutions, labor unrest, foreign investment, and diplomatic alignments in the region could be interpreted through canal security. A waterway built for movement became a reason for control. This is why the canal belongs in the history of U.S. empire, even after Panama became independent. The empire was not only the canal zone. It was the strategic logic radiating outward from it. The canal gave the United States a reason to treat the Caribbean basin as a security perimeter. To Panama and its neighbors, that perimeter could feel like a cage. The canal's construction also transformed the environment. Building it meant flooding land, altering rivers, creating Gatun Lake, cutting through hills, moving earth on a massive scale, and reshaping ecosystems. The canal is often described as a triumph over nature, but in truth it created a new artificial natural system. Gatun Lake became both infrastructure and ecosystem. The watershed became both environment and machine. This matters because modern debates over canal water and expansion are not new intrusions into a pristine story. The canal has always been environmental transformation. The question is whether the transformation can now be managed more wisely than before. Panama must protect forests, reservoirs, biodiversity, and communities while maintaining a global trade route. This is a difficult task because the canal's benefits and costs are distributed unevenly. The world benefits from trade efficiency. Panama bears the immediate environmental responsibility. Ships pass through. The watershed stays behind. If the global economy depends on the canal, then the global economy has a stake in Panama's environmental management. But that stake should not become control. It should become support, respect, and recognition of Panama's burden. The canal's human geography after 1999 changed as former canal zone lands were integrated into Panama. Areas once controlled by the United States became available for Panamanian development, housing, logistics, ports, universities, parks, and business. The physical return of territory allowed Panama to reimagine spaces that had long been symbols of exclusion. This was one of the quieter achievements of the handover. Sovereignty is not only a flag ceremony. It is land use. It is deciding what happens to former bases, roads, neighborhoods, and administrative buildings. It is turning spaces designed for foreign control into spaces serving national life. Of course, integration was not simple. Former canal zone areas carried social, economic, and legal complexities. But the broader meaning was clear. The geography of division could be repurposed. A strip that once cut Panama apart could become part of Panama's own development strategy. This transformation shows that decolonization is physical. It happens in buildings, fences, ports, schools, and neighborhoods. The canal remained, but the zone changed meaning. The canal also has a cultural afterlife in literature, film, memory, and national storytelling. For Americans, it appears as an epic of engineering. For Panamanians, as a struggle for sovereignty. For Caribbean descendants, as a story of labor, migration, and discrimination. For global shipping, as a business route. For military planners, as a strategic passage. For environmentalists, as a watershed system. Each story is true in part. The challenge is to hold these stories together without letting one erase the others. A canal that is only an engineering marvel becomes propaganda. A canal that is only imperial crime ignores the real achievement and the ways Panama has made it its own. A canal that is only a trade route forgets the people who died and the politics that shaped it. Great infrastructure always produces competing memories because it touches many lives differently. The Panama Canal is one of the clearest examples. It is a machine that became a myth, and myths are never neutral. The canal's future may depend on whether Panama can make its own version of the myth strong enough to withstand foreign nostalgia. The modern canal also raises the question of logistics sovereignty. In a globalized economy, a country may control territory but depend on foreign shipping lines, insurance markets, port operators, fuel suppliers, dredging firms, software vendors, and customers. Panama controls the canal, but the canal exists inside a network of global capital. That network can bring revenue and expertise. It can also create pressure. This is where sovereignty becomes more complicated than old flags. A state may own an asset but rely on foreign companies around it. It may regulate ports but depend on global shipping alliances. It may set tolls but respond to market behavior. It may choose contractors but face geopolitical scrutiny. The canal is Panamanian, but its ecosystem is international. Panama's task is to manage this ecosystem without becoming subordinate to it. That requires law, transparency, technical skill, diplomatic balance, and political confidence. It requires knowing when a commercial issue is becoming a strategic issue. It requires preventing corruption and elite capture. It requires defending the canal not only from foreign takeover, but from domestic mismanagement. Sovereignty is not only external. It must also be protected from within. The canal's connection to the U.S. domestic political imagination has returned in recent years through rhetoric about reclaiming or taking back the canal. Such language is historically loaded. It implies that the canal's rightful owner is the country that built it, not the country through which it runs and to which it was legally transferred. It reduces Panama's sovereignty to a technicality. This rhetoric can be politically useful in the United States because it activates nostalgia for an age of visible American mastery. It speaks to voters who feel the world slipping away and want symbols of control restored. The canal becomes a stage for a larger emotional argument. America built great things. America gave them away. America should take them back. But this story ignores why the canal was transferred in the first place. It was transferred because continued U.S. control was politically and morally unsustainable. It was transferred because Panamanian sovereignty mattered. It was transferred because an empire that refuses to adapt eventually creates more instability than security. To speak of taking back the canal is to speak as if history stopped before Panama became fully sovereign. It did not. For Panama, the canal's greatest defense may be competent management. International sympathy matters. Treaties matter. Diplomacy matters. But performance matters too. Since the handover, Panama has generally shown that it can operate the canal effectively, expand it, and manage its role in global trade. That record is one of the strongest answers to anyone who argues that the canal should be controlled by someone else. Competence is political. Every successful transit is a statement. Every year of reliable operation strengthens the legitimacy of Panamanian control. Every expansion, conservation plan, and professional response to crisis reinforces the idea that sovereignty works. This does not mean Panama is immune to criticism. No institution is. The canal faces real challenges: drought, corruption risks, port disputes, geopolitical pressure, and environmental stress. But those challenges are reasons to strengthen Panamanian governance, not reasons to return to imperial control. The canal's future should be judged by how well Panama adapts, not by whether outsiders feel nostalgic. The Panama Canal also sits at the intersection of two different American traditions. One is the tradition of anti-colonial rhetoric, the United States as a republic born against empire, a defender of self-government, a critic of European colonialism. The other is the tradition of expansion and intervention, land acquisition, military occupation, unequal treaties, and hemispheric dominance. The canal forced these traditions into contradiction. American leaders could describe the canal as a gift to civilization, a neutral route for world commerce, and a triumph of progress. But the political method used to secure it looked imperial. This contradiction has never fully disappeared from U.S. foreign policy. The United States often wants to be seen as both liberator and manager, partner and supervisor, anti-imperial and dominant. Panama experienced that contradiction directly. It gained independence with American support, then lived with American control at its center. The canal was both the reason Panama became globally important and the reason its sovereignty was compromised. This is why the canal belongs in any honest history of American power. It shows how a republic can become an empire while still speaking the language of freedom. The canal's relationship with Colombia is another shadow in the story. Colombia lost Panama in 1903 after rejecting the Canal Treaty. The United States later paid compensation through the Thomson-Reuter Treaty, but money could not fully erase the political wound. For Colombians, Panama's separation became part of a history of U.S. interference and national loss. This matters because the canal's birth was not only a U.S.-Panama story, it was also a Colombia story. One country's strategic shortcut was another country's territorial rupture. The independence of Panama had local causes, but American intervention shaped the outcome decisively. Without U.S. naval power and diplomatic recognition, the separation might have unfolded differently. The canal therefore sits inside three national memories at once. For the United States, bold construction. For Panama, compromised birth and eventual recovery. For Colombia, loss and humiliation. The same event can be a beginning, a triumph, and a wound depending on where one stands. This is why history resists simple narration. The canal connected oceans by dividing memories. The Panama Canal's future also depends on competition with alternative routes. The Suez Canal, U.S. intermodal rail, Arctic shipping possibilities, Cape routes, and changing vessel sizes all influence canal demand. Shipping companies constantly calculate cost, time, reliability, fuel, risk, and cargo type. The canal must remain competitive in a fluid system. This competition is not only economic, it is strategic. If climate change opens Arctic routes for part of the year, if Red Sea conflict disrupts Suez, if drought limits Panama, if ports become congested, global shipping adapts. The canal is vital, but not isolated. Its importance rises and falls relative to the instability of other routes. That means Panama must think globally. It is not enough to manage the canal itself. It must understand world shipping, geopolitics, climate, energy markets, port technology, and ship design. A canal authority today is part engineering body, part water manager, part commercial strategist, part diplomatic actor. The shortcut survives by staying relevant. The canal also teaches a lesson about infrastructure and sovereignty that applies far beyond Panama. Around the world, ports, railways, pipelines, undersea cables, satellite stations, data centers, and canals are becoming strategic again. The age of globalization once encouraged people to see infrastructure as neutral and commercial. The age of rivalry has made infrastructure political again. Panama is at the front of this shift because its infrastructure has always been political. The canal was never neutral in origin. It was built through power. Today, the language has changed, but the logic remains. Who owns terminals? Who controls data? Who finances expansion? Who manages risk? Who can apply pressure in a crisis? The Panama Canal is therefore a preview of the 21st century infrastructure battlefield. It shows that sovereignty now depends on contracts as much as borders, cyber systems as much as soldiers, and water levels as much as treaties. The empires of the future may not always seize land. They may seek leverage over the systems that make land valuable. There is another reason the canal story remains powerful. It reveals how quickly moral judgment can change. In the early 20th century, many Americans celebrated Roosevelt's actions in Panama as energetic statecraft. Today, the same events look far more troubling. The shift does not mean people today are wiser in every way. It means the moral framework has changed. Sovereignty, anti-colonialism, and self-determination carry more weight now than they did in the age of open imperial confidence. This changing judgment matters because current leaders are also acting inside assumptions future generations may reject. Today's port pressure, investment deals, climate decisions, and security claims may one day be judged by standards not yet fully dominant. What now seems pragmatic may later look coercive. What now seems commercially normal may later look like strategic capture. What now seems like necessary development may later look environmentally reckless. The canal warns us that infrastructure decisions outlive the moral comfort of their makers. Concrete remains after rhetoric fades. Treaties remain after presidents leave. Locks, ports, and reservoirs preserve choices made under pressure. That is why the canal's future deserves caution. The world will live with today's decisions long after today's headlines are gone. The canal's daily operation is a choreography of precision. Ships enter approaches from the Atlantic or Pacific. Pilots board. Tugs assist. Locked chambers fill and empty. Lines are handled. Traffic is sequenced. Lake levels are monitored. Maintenance crews inspect equipment. Weather is watched. Every transit is routine only because thousands of details are controlled. This daily choreography is important because it counters the myth that the canal is simply a cut through land. It is not passive. It is performed. Every ship passage is an event requiring skill, judgment, and coordination. The canal is a living machine, not a dead monument. This is also why disruptions matter so much. A mechanical failure, labor problem, cyber issue, drought, landslide, or accident can ripple quickly. The canal's efficiency depends on constant attention. Great infrastructure creates the illusion of ease. When it works, nobody notices the effort. When it fails, everyone discovers how much they depended on it. The Panama Canal is one of the world's great examples of invisible expertise. Its success is measured partly by how rarely the world has to think about it. The canal story also contains a warning about national myths. Americans mythologize the builder. Panamanians mythologize the recovery. Engineers mythologize the solution. Each myth contains truth, but each can become dangerous when it excludes the others. A country needs myths, but history needs friction. The builder myth can erase imperial coercion. The recovery myth can underplay the continuing dependence on global trade and U.S. interest. The engineering myth can hide labor exploitation and environmental risk. The sovereignty myth can become complacent if it ignores corruption, water stress, or port influence. The modern geopolitics myth can exaggerate foreign threats while ignoring domestic governance. A mature story of the canal must resist single meanings. It must be proud and critical, technical and human, national and global. The canal deserves that complexity because its history is too important for propaganda. If the Panama Canal made America an empire, it also made Panama a country whose sovereignty would always have to be actively defended. The canal's future may also be shaped by migration and inequality inside Panama. Canal revenues and logistics growth have helped make Panama one of the most economically dynamic countries in Latin America, but benefits are not evenly distributed. The skyline of Panama City can suggest prosperity, while rural, indigenous, and marginalized communities may experience a very different reality. The canal is national wealth, but national wealth does not automatically become national equality. This matters because the legitimacy of canal sovereignty depends partly on whether Panamanians broadly feel the canal serves them. If the canal enriches elites while ordinary citizens face high costs, weak services, or exclusion, resentment can grow. A strategic asset must be tied to social legitimacy, not only national pride. Infrastructure can produce money without justice. The canal's history already showed that in the Canal Zone. Modern Panama faces a different version of the same question. How can the benefits of the waterway support a more inclusive society? A canal recovered from empire should not become a symbol of internal inequality. Sovereignty should mean more than ownership. It should mean public benefit. The relationship between the canal and indigenous communities is another important part of the future. Water projects, watershed protection, roads, reservoirs, and environmental regulation can affect communities whose land and livelihoods are tied to areas beyond the urban canal corridor. If new reservoirs or water-saving projects are proposed, questions of consultation, consent, compensation, and environmental justice will become central. This is one of the hardest parts of climate adaptation. A national asset faces stress. The state seeks solutions. Those solutions may burden specific communities. The language of national necessity can then become dangerous. It can make local rights seem secondary to global trade. Panama must avoid reproducing, internally, the logic once used against it externally. Just as larger powers should not override Panama's sovereignty because the canal is important, Panama should not override local communities without serious democratic process because canal water is important. Justice must scale downward as well as upward. A country defending sovereignty abroad must practice consent at home. The canal also reminds us that the age of empire did not end in one moment. It changed form. The United States gave up the Canal Zone, but American interest remained. Panama gained control, but global capital became more important. Chinese-linked companies entered port operations, and U.S. pressure returned in a new language. International arbitration became part of the battlefield. Shipping data, cyber systems, and concessions became strategic. This is not old empire exactly, but it is not a pure post-imperial world either. It is something more subtle, a world where formal sovereignty exists alongside intense external pressure over infrastructure, finance, law, and logistics. Small states have flags, seats at the United Nations, and legal authority. But when they control choke points, the pressure on them can be enormous. Panama's experience shows what sovereignty looks like after empire, not freedom from pressure, but the permanent work of managing pressure. The canal is Panamanian. That does not mean others stop wanting influence over it. In that sense, the empire never completely left the shortcut. It changed its clothing. The Panama Canal also altered the imagination of global time. Before it, travel between oceans around the Americas demanded long duration. After it, schedules changed. Shipping routes tightened. Military planning accelerated. Markets adjusted. The canal did not eliminate distance, but it compressed it. Compression of time is one of the deepest forms of power. Modern logistics is built on this compression. Companies promise delivery because routes, ports, containers, and data systems make time predictable. The canal is part of that promise. It allows planners to convert geography into schedule. When drought or conflict disrupts the canal, time expands again. Ships wait. Goods arrive late. Costs rise. The old geography returns. This is why choke points feel so dramatic when they fail. They reveal that modern speed is artificial. It depends on maintained systems, political stability, climate patterns, and skilled labor. The world has not truly conquered distance. It has built fragile shortcuts through it. The Panama Canal is one of those shortcuts. Its power is the power to make time obey. Its vulnerability is that time can rebel. The final question is what kind of canal the 21st century will require. The 20th century canal was built around U.S. power, naval mobility, and industrial trade. The late 20th century canal became a symbol of Panamanian sovereignty and global shipping. The 21st century canal must become something else: climate adapted, digitally secure, geopolitically balanced, environmentally responsible, and socially legitimate. That is a difficult combination. More ships may mean more revenue, but more water stress. More security cooperation may protect the canal, but raise sovereignty concerns. More foreign investment may build capacity, but create dependency. More climate adaptation may require difficult land and water decisions. More geopolitical attention may increase Panama's leverage, but also its exposure. The canal's future will not be solved by one engineering project. It will require statecraft. Panama must manage water, law, diplomacy, markets, technology, and memory at the same time. The original canal was built by cutting through land. The future canal will be preserved by navigating complexity. The Panama Canal began as a dream of shortening distance. It became a French catastrophe, an American imperial project, an engineering triumph, a racialized labor regime, a sovereign wound, a Cold War asset, a Panamanian victory, a global trade artery, a climate vulnerability, and now a new arena of US-China competition. That is a lot of history for one waterway. But choke points concentrate history because they concentrate movement. People fight over them because they make the world move differently. The Panama Canal made the world smaller, but it also made the politics around it larger. The canal's future will depend on water, governance, neutrality, climate adaptation, port control, cybersecurity, and Panama's ability to defend sovereignty between competing giants. The old empire built the shortcut. The modern republic operates it. The new empires circle it in subtler ways. The question is not whether the canal will remain important. It will. The question is whether Panama can keep the shortcut from becoming again what it was at birth, a passage through its territory controlled by someone else's fear, money, and ambition. The Panama Canal made America an empire because it gave the United States what empires crave most: reach. It turned distance into strategy. It allowed fleets to move, goods to flow, and power to cross the hemisphere through a controlled gate. It announced that the United States would not merely occupy a continent. It would organize movement between oceans. But the canal also made Panama a nation shaped by contradiction. Born with American support, constrained by American control, divided by the canal zone, then transformed by the recovery of sovereignty, Panama has lived the full arc of the waterway's power. The canal gave Panama global importance, but it also made Panama a permanent object of outside attention. Today, the canal stands at another turning point. Climate tests its water. China and the United States test its neutrality. Global shipping tests its capacity. Panamanian sovereignty tests whether a small country can control one of the world's most important arteries in an age when every artery becomes strategic. A shortcut is never just a shortcut when the world depends on it. It is a lever, and the Panama Canal remains one of the greatest levers ever cut into the earth. There is one last layer to the story. The canal's power is not only that it moves ships, but that it forces every generation to reveal what it believes about sovereignty. In 1903, the United States believed strategic necessity could justify pressure on Colombia and extraordinary control over Panama. In 1914, American leaders believed engineering success could vindicate political aggression. In 1977, Carter and Torrijos argued, in very different languages, that sovereignty and stability required a new arrangement. In 1999, Panama proved that a small country could operate a global artery with competence. In the 2020s, the US-China rivalry revived the old question in a new form. When a waterway is vital to the world, does the country that owns it truly get to decide? That question is not unique to Panama, but Panama makes it impossible to avoid. Every global choke point creates a tension between local sovereignty and global dependence. The world wants the canal to work. The United States wants it secure. China wants access and influence. Shipping firms want predictability. Panama wants revenue and respect. Those interests overlap, but they are not identical. When they clash, the old imperial reflex returns. Someone larger begins to suggest that the waterway is too important to be left to the country that controls it. That is the exact idea Panama spent the 20th century defeating. The modern challenge is more subtle than the old canal zone, but subtle pressure can still be pressure. A foreign government may not demand a treaty zone. It may demand contract changes, security reviews, port restructuring, preferred vendors, investment screening, sanctions, investigations, or public alignment. A rival power may not send troops. It may use arbitration, inspections, trade pressure, financing, or diplomatic warnings. The battlefield is no longer only territory. It is the network around territory. This is why the canal is one of the best subjects for understanding power today. It connects the visible and invisible forms of empire. The visible form was the canal zone: fences, flags, bases, courts, and foreign administration. The invisible form is leverage: ports, contracts, registries, data, water, cyber systems, insurance, debt, shipping alliances, diplomatic statements, and market access. The old empire could be photographed. The new one must be traced. Panama's great task is to make sovereignty operational in this environment. It must not only declare control over the canal, it must control the conditions that surround the canal, the ports at both ends, the water that feeds the locks, the technology that schedules ships, the environmental systems that protect reservoirs, the legal frameworks that govern concessions, the anti-corruption institutions that defend public trust, and the diplomacy that keeps larger powers from turning Panama into a proxy battlefield. If Panama succeeds, the canal can become one of the great examples of post-imperial competence, a small country managing a world artery, balancing rival powers, adapting to climate stress, and converting geography into national development. If it fails, the canal may again become what it was at birth, a strategic asset around which outsiders decide too much. The stakes are not only Panamanian, they are global. The future of the Panama Canal will show whether small states controlling critical infrastructure can remain sovereign in an age of superpower rivalry. It will show whether climate adaptation can be managed without sacrificing local rights. It will show whether infrastructure built by empire can be governed after empire in a more legitimate way. It will show whether the world can depend on a shortcut without trying to own it. That is why the canal still feels alive in history. It is not frozen in 1914. It did not end in 1999. It is still changing, still pressuring governments, still shaping markets, still tempting powerful countries, still reminding Panama that geography is both gift and burden. The canal shortened the world, but it lengthened the shadow of power. And in that shadow, the same question keeps returning. Who controls the shortcut?